Hello and welcome to the final installment of this Dungeons & Dragons campaign. Now, because of Mordin's alignment change, he became uneligible to continue advancing as a Hexblade. Not wanting to leave him behind, we paused awarding the player experience until the resolution of the last session's final encounter with Fallen Star, so Mordin could qualify to enter a new prestige class. After that, the players were awarded a whopping 55,000 experience points. Now, in Alter Aeon terms, that doesn't sound like much, but in 3rd edition D&D, that was enough to propel them from level 8 all the way to level 13. Our heroes have discovered the big bad evil guy of the campaign. They've had a few dungeon crawls, so now it's time for the dragon part of Dungeons & Dragons. In this case, a rust dragon named Califax, intent on reconquering the island of Slowy and renewing his former empire. Unfortunately, even after trying to reschedule, my nephew was unable to attend, so Sienna had to be detoured out of the last session. And now, for the exciting conclusion. Session 16, Rock the Dragon. I'll save my observations for the end, so let's get right to the narrative. Last time our heroes had rescued the Vesper, Fallen Star, and had plied her with questions about her predicament. She continued to patiently answer questions and even help them to carry their treasure. It took several trips. At one point, Mordin decided to use his newfound magic knowledge and summoned his magic companion. No longer a dark companion, he referred to this new phantom dog as a bright companion. It appeared in the same shape as before, that of a good-sized bloodhound, but instead of being dark or gray, it was a shining white color. Though still translucent, it appeared more solid than before, and while it was clearly a non-living illusion, its movement was more fluid and lifelike than it had been as a dark companion. The bright companion not only brightened up its surroundings with the light that it shed, but it also seemed to have a mental effect on those around it, brightening up their confidence as well. Our heroes asked Fallen Star more about Califax's personality. She said that he was cunning and cared little for the perils of others, except for those he considered to be close confidants. She also said that in spite of being a decidedly wicked creature, Califax was a dragon of his word. If he agreed to do something, he would do it. That was why he was loath to promise anything to anyone, so favors from him were rare. But if one were to secure his word, he would follow through with it, even to his detriment. Another thing that they had asked Fallen Star was how she was trapped there. After examining her former prison, she pointed out to the party the ring of powdered iron that had been used as a magic circle to entrap her. She noticed that a revocation spell had been made permanent in the spot where she had been, which had prevented her from using her natural plane-shifting abilities. A permanent silence spell in the location had prevented her from using any of her spells. Another question they put to Fallen Star was what Califax might have been having his minions mine for. She speculated that since Califax's primary diet consisted of ores and metals, he probably took what the kobolds had mined so he could eat it. She recalled that he considered himself to be a master geologist, and also had a large collection of rare minerals. Upon spotting the dead succubus, Fallen Star turned her over to get a good look at her. Tess asked if she knew who she was, but the Vesper replied that she did not. The succubus had often entered the chamber, where she had gestured toward her and had moved her mouth as if she was speaking. Fallen Star suspected that she was trying to taunt her, but could never hear anything that she had said. Returning to the surface wasn't much of a problem. In his haste to escape, Califax had knocked down most of the dungeon's walls. Since the mine tunnels were undisturbed, they figured that he must have polymorphed back into a kobold to get through them. In any case, there was no sign of him. It was early in the evening once they had hauled all of the treasure from the dungeon topside. Fallen Star had said that she wanted to take a look around, so she and Kara flew straight up, high in the sky, to survey the entire island. While they waited, Sienna took Mordin aside to talk to him. The kobold told Mordin that he was having mixed feelings about fighting Califax. On one hand, he was thrilled by the prospect of fighting a foe as powerful as the Rust Dragon. However, he further explained that he had been taught when he was young to honor and revere dragons, and now that they had come into conflict with one, he was reluctant to fight him. He had also regretted his decision not to go with the freed kobold slaves. He asked Mordin if he would hold it against him if he decided to leave the party. Mordin said that it would be okay. While in the air, Kara pointed out to Fallen Star the various settlements represented by clusters of light that they could see. Fallen Star lamented that much had changed since her imprisonment. Once they had landed, Sienna said goodbye to our heroes and left to find the other kobolds. They gave him the amethyst from the mine, most of the other gems they had found, and as many coins as he could carry. They gave him the Ring of Wishes, which, of course, only had one wish remaining, and sent him on his way. Fallen Star noticed that Vimarkin had been built around the portal to Cordan. She asked if the other portal had been discovered, and when our heroes looked confused, she concluded that they had not. Fallen Star explained that the portals formed a complete circuit, with Slowey connected to Cordan, Cordan connected to Arceus, Arceus connected to Atmir, and Atmir connected back to Slowey. Mordin said that the last portal wasn't known, and Fallen Star said that it would be in the forest southwest of Vimarkin, about halfway to Bandera Azul. The Vesper explained that if they couldn't find Califax elsewhere, the portal would lead to his lair. Our heroes then asked Fallen Star if she could help them face Califax, but she declined. Califax obviously wanted her, and she said that it would probably be a bad idea to deliver herself to him on a silver platter. Besides, she reasoned that without her spellbook, she only had a fraction of her magic available, and wouldn't be much help in a fight. She said that the best course of action would be for her to return to Purnima. She needed to report to Selene what was going on anyway. They did convince her to stay and watch over the treasure, while Kara, Mordin, and Tes returned to Vimarkin. After spending the rest of the night resting in the guild hall, our heroes decided to pay the Mages Guild a visit. After listening to the tale of their recent exploits in earnest, Lotus recommended that they tell the town council what had happened, and our heroes assured him that they would. Lotus told them that Califax was the reason why the Goros had shut down the portal system linking the Westering Islands. He said that it had been part of the strategy to trap Califax on Cordan, but he had actually been on Slowey when the portals were closed. Califax managed to slay many of the giant spellcasters left on Slowey, thus preventing them from ever reopening the portals. However, this also cost Califax his empire, as he was cut off from most of his Chain Devil armies. According to local legends, Califax was allegedly defeated and sealed away by the knight San Milano. Kara said that apparently the legends were wrong. Lotus cast a phantom steed for each of them after receiving the dead hobgoblin's spellbook and a hefty sum of gold pieces as payment. Riding their magic steeds, they quickly returned to the site of the mine, collected their treasure, and bid Fallen Star farewell. Fallen Star asked Mordin if there was anything he wanted to say to Selene, and he simply told her to thank the Archangel for his new gifts. She nodded and disappeared. The party spent the rest of the day bartering their treasure for magic items. While doing so, they interacted with both Rodnar and Edna, and brought them up to speed with what had happened with Califax. Rodnar said that he had a lance from back in his younger days fighting dragon cultists, and asked the party to come get him when they had located the dragon. Edna said that she could lend them some dragonbane when they were ready to face Califax. The party then left what they couldn't sell off in the guild hall. Before going to bed, the party then returned to the Mages Guild and asked to borrow the scrying pool. Tes cast scrying to attempt to locate Califax, and even with Lotus's help, they were unable to find him. Tes promised to try again the next day. They spent the night at the Mercenary Guild Hall. The next morning they ran into Guard Captain Sovel, who told them that he had alerted the town guard to be on the lookout for strangers in town. The party wanted to talk to Boris and see what had happened after he left with the captured slavers, so they went through the portal and headed to Boris's place of business. The barrister told them that he had exiled the slavers to Cordan and chased them out of Indira. After telling Boris of their intentions to hunt down the dragon, he said that he had some scrolls that might help them, and came back with them to Vimarken to fetch them. Who should our heroes find but a particular half-elf dressed in red, purple, and blue garb, casually playing a mandriola in the town square. The party informed Boris that it was Califax in disguise, and immediately confronted him. Before saying anything else, Califax told our heroes that if they cared about Vimarken whatsoever, that they should tread lightly, or he might accidentally burn it down should a scuffle arise. Tes began to verbally lay into him, but he quickly produced something that gave them pause. Califax showed them a leather bracer with a silver chain loosely wrapped around it. An Argale charm in the shape of Dentin's holy symbol hung from the chain. Most priests displayed their god's holy symbol in a long necklace so they could easily access it and use it as a divine focus for spellcasting and turning undead. There was only one person that they knew who wore his holy symbol like that: Syned. Mordin immediately asked Califax what he had done with the favored soul, and Califax replied that he was safe for the time being. Califax said that he was willing to release Syned without harm if the party would simply walk through the portal and never return. Kara asked why he would offer them such a deal, and Califax replied that they were too much trouble and he wanted them gone. He further went on to say that there was a whole wide world out there and that people with their talents could find work elsewhere. Tes demanded to know how Califax knew anything about her family. He replied that as a bard, he had once been in the employ of a Rubicon noble by the name of Count Rugen. Apparently the Mossyglow family had owed him a sum of money, and he tired of waiting for them to repay him. The Wallachian Confederation wouldn't let him seize their homes and wealth while they were still alive, so he had them wiped out so he could collect the vacant properties. Tes said that the castle they had been in for her brother's wedding had been burnt down, and asked if he had been the one to do so. Califax coyly replied that he knew a certain handsome fire-breathing dragon who could have performed the deed. Upon hearing this, Tes started to scream and swear at Califax, but it was Mordin who actually took the first swing. His falchion barely missed Califax as he weaved back and forth to avoid each of Mordin's attacks. Califax unleashed his fear aura in response. The group was now prepared for the magical assault on their courage and stood fast. Only Tes faltered and backed away for a few seconds before Mordin used one of his supernatural abilities to boost her resistance to fear, and she regained her composure and will to fight. Kara cast Earthen Grasp, and a giant stony hand reached up from the ground and closed around Califax, leaving only his head exposed. The War Mage retreated and took cover behind the portal to Indira, while Mordin charged forward, determined to sever Califax's head from the rest of his body. The polymorphed dragon squirmed like a worm. He relented for a moment, and then took a big bite of gravel from the fist that surrounded him and swallowed it. Before Mordin could strike, He vomited a cone of fine metal powder at our heroes. The powder's effects were immediate. Mordin had borne the full brunt of the breath attack, and his magic falchion and mithril armor eroded away to useless rust. The tip of Tess's spear likewise melted to rust, and Kara's Morningstar was also destroyed. Only Kara's magic breastplate survived, having been partially protected by the portal she was hiding behind. While Mordin recoiled from his attack, Califax slipped out of the stony fist, but he was subsequently assailed by a magical barrage. Tes powered up a magic missile spell and waylaid the dragon bard with a quintet of magic projectiles, while Kara simultaneously assaulted him with a greater acid orb. Enormous bruises appeared on his body where the invisible force missiles had struck him, and the entire front of his body was covered with oozing lesions and sores, where the giant orb of greenish-yellow acid had burned his flesh. They could see this because the spells had stripped away most of his clothing. Califax was nauseated by the acid fumes, but readied his hands to try and cast a spell anyway, when he was suddenly tackled from behind by Boris. The paladin had circled behind Califax and snuck up on him while he was busy getting blasted. Mordin jumped to assist Boris, and the two of them wrestled Califax and quickly pinned him to the ground. Califax tried to make good on his threat to burn the village down, but the two warriors, dragging him around, kept slamming his face into the pavement, so all he managed to do was leave pockets of ashes in the gravel with each fire-breathing attempt. Even Fernando got in on the action, biting Califax's foot and latching on with his jaws. Kara advanced and readied to counterspell in case Califax managed to get a spell off, and Tes cast Enlarge Person on Mordin. Now the size of an ogre, Mordin was practically sitting on top of Califax and effortlessly keeping him prone and face down. Califax's skin kept momentarily changing brown and scaly as he tried to polymorph back into his dragon shape. But the pain of Mordin's weight crushing him, Boris's fist pummeling him, and even Fernando's fangs biting him, kept breaking his concentration. Remembering what Fallen Star had said about him, Mordin called out to Califax, telling him that he was conquered, lost, and a coward. He further proclaimed himself to be his master, Mordin the White, the fortuitous notary, and the champion of Selene. He then demanded that Califax submit or die. Califax tried to ignore Mordin's insults and boasting while he thought of how to escape, but that last bit, the name Selene, plucked a memory from deep in Califax's mind. Selene was the bright Lilith who had thwarted his attempt to conquer the Lavender Shores. After having banished him from Purnima, he could hardly believe that Selene would have caught up to him after all this time to further exact vengeance upon him. Yet here was this manling claiming to be her champion. He concluded that the adventurers must have freed Fallen Star and made some sort of connection to the Archangel, because they certainly seemed to have had a great leap forward in power. He had completely underestimated them. He made one last effort to strike back, attempting to conjure a wall of iron to smash his opponents, but the pain from their attacks was too great, and he lost concentration once again. Now, even the half-elf girl was kicking him while he was down. Califax was convinced that if he didn't surrender, he would certainly perish. Our heroes heard a groan from Califax that sounded like, "I yield." Mordin held up a fist, indicating to the others that they should stand down. They did, although Tes couldn't help but give Califax one last kick, and Mordin remained seated on top of Califax while he spoke to him. Mordin told Califax that they would spare his life if he would swear to surrender to their custody and not try to escape. Before Califax could answer, Tes loudly protested, stating that Califax had murdered her family and should die for his crimes. However, Califax emphatically said, "I swear it." Now that he had the dragon's oath, Mordin looked to Tes and said that without Califax's word, he might have still managed to escape the situation and hurt or kill more people. He got up off of Califax, and Califax stood. Now, by this time, the group had attracted the attention of the townspeople, who were now gathering to form a crowd. Among the people was Rodnar, who they had fetch manacles and chains. Kara asked Califax where Sened was, and became quite annoyed when he refused to answer. Mordin said that his cooperation wasn't a condition of their agreement, but he picked up Sened's bracer that had been dropped during the fight, gave it to Tes, and told her to run up to the Mages Guild and use their scrying pool to find him. Once Rodnar returned, Califax's limbs were shackled and bound. Kara asked Mordin what they were going to do with him, and Mordin replied that he knew of a certain prison cell that had recently been vacated that was just his size. Tes swiftly returned to the others to inform them of the results of her scrying, which was that Sened was safe in his bed in Fort Margera. Apparently, Califax had merely seized his bracer while he was asleep. Our heroes turned to look at Califax for an explanation, only for him to sheepishly grin and attempt to shrug his shoulders despite his restraints. Once Mordin explained his plan for Califax to Tes, she reluctantly agreed to take him there. She could see the irony of placing Califax in a prison that he had arranged for his ex-lover. Mordin also tactfully added that while her family's torment had only lasted a short time, Califax's punishment would be forever. But Tes didn't find much comfort in that thought. Kara tried to ask him questions, but Califax remained completely silent on their journey to the dungeon under the abandoned kobold mine. Once they were in the final chamber, our heroes interacted with the figure seated on the throne, touching it to activate it, and then providing the passcode in Giant. A star has fallen here. Using a little arcane know-how, they determined that the figure was a flesh golem, and since its creator was long dead, providing the passcode gave them the ability to command it. They reprogrammed it with a new passcode, and ordered it to continue guarding the chamber. Our heroes reprogrammed the Caryatid column in a similar fashion. The wall of fire had restored itself, so they passed through the illusionary section again against the south wall. Mordin placed Califax on the stone pad where they had found Fallen Star, and Tes collected the magnets that had been placed in the divots along the bottom. There was a brief but clearly audible hum as the walls of force were reactivated. Our heroes patted down the invisible walls to make sure that they were all there, so that the prisoner would be secure. Califax merely sat there. He closed his eyes, and transformed from his half-elf shape into his preferred kobold form. The manacles and chains slid off of him, and he pushed them to one side and sat down again. He and our heroes stared at one another for a while through the walls. Califax said something to them that they couldn't make out because of the silence spell within the prison. Had they heard him, they would have heard him say,
"Foolish manlings, you have not defeated me. You have only delayed my inevitable return to power. One day, my followers will find me and release me."
At this point, I declared that they had won, and asked if there were any loose ends they wanted to inquire about before wrapping up the campaign. My brother and his wife performed a bunch of intense, lovey-dovey role-playing that I didn't get to hear much of because of the kids running around, but it resulted in them saying that their characters had agreed to get married. They asked what had happened with Char Featherstep and her job to find Mayor Bartleby's body, since she never showed up back in Vimargan. They found out that she had found the bandits that had stolen the body, and had went back to Indira to team up with Gronk the Minotaur. They and Char's bear companion, Misha, were all killed. Our heroes cleared out the bandits, and using divination magic, they discovered that Califax was behind the body snatching. Apparently, he had wanted the mayor's body to use a Speak with Dead spell on it in order to find out where the dungeon containing Fallen Star was. Unfortunately, the mayor had now been dead for so long that a raised dead spell was insufficient to bring him back. However, the Baron of Indira was so fond of Gronk that he not only funded a raised dead spell to bring him back, but he also had Char raised as well. They followed up with Sened and returned his bracer to him, for which he was very grateful. Our heroes explained everything to Sened that had happened with Califax, and he promised to relay the information back to the keeper of the reliquary in Cadenissimo. Sened performed the wedding ceremony for Mordin and Tes. It wasn't long after that the favorite soul decided that he had done all he could do in Pelham, and returned to work for the Vimarcan Mercenary Guild. So, here are my final thoughts. I learned a lot from this campaign. First of all, I learned that the favored soul class stinks. Whenever I played as Sened, I kept wishing that I had the versatility of a cleric. I will never play that class again without heavy modification. This was my first campaign dealing with a dedicated diplomancer in the form of my sister-in-law's character, Tess. My first real test of her powers was the encounter with Valerio, Snark, and Chris outside of Stillwater, when the players were on their way back from Venetia. I had expected that to result in a fight, but I had to improvise an alternative when Tess started breaking out her incredible diplomacy rolls. From that point, I devised every encounter with two possible conclusions. One in case the players fought their way through it, and another in case they used diplomacy to alleviate the situation. I designed two prestige classes for the campaign. The first was the Cultist of Light, which would have been a fire specialization option for my wife's character had she chosen to follow through with it. The other was the Fortuitous Notary, which I devised for my brother's character when I realized he was going to change alignment and become ineligible to continue leveling as a Hexblade. I didn't expect to end up participating in the final fight with Califax using an NPC. It was my plan to have Califax taunt the players with Sened's bracer and end up fleeing if a fight broke out to his lair, which would have been where Fallen Star suggested that the portal to Atmir was. I figured that Califax's fear aura would keep any of the townspeople of Vimarcan from getting in the way, except that I realized that they had brought the one and only NPC around that was immune to fear by virtue of being a paladin. There were a number of aborted story arcs. A big one would have been the reveal that Sened wasn't human. He was, in fact, a lesser Aasimar. When his mother had said that he had no father, he would have really had no father. He would have discovered that Dentin had something to do with his birth. One clue that the players never picked up on was the fact that they found black hair dye that had been left behind by Sened. Sened actually had metallic gold color hair that he dyed to conceal his angelic heritage. Another hint was when his voice changed when speaking Celestial with the keeper of the reliquary. Once it became clear that his background wasn't going to be part of the story, I just dropped it. Another arc that went nowhere was with Holly the bartender's daughter. I was going to have a subplot where the players would discover that Holly was being abused by her father, whose name was Drud, and that's why she hung around with them all the time. It might have been interesting to see how they would have dealt with the situation, but the opportunity to insert it never arose. The mayor's maid, whose name was Gordita, would have been probably the earliest clue to Califax's involvement with the story had the players tried to track her down. But they didn't. She had been a spy sent by the dragon to watch the gnome. But since they never discovered that, I had her show up as an opponent working with one of Califax's other lackeys, Kroll. I honestly expected the players to try and haggle with Califax more when first encountering him, or at least trying to talk with his drow lackeys. I even had names for them, and their own motivations for working with Califax, but it never came up. The players really did kill the male drow, but I decided that his sister had raised him later. If the players had gone to check on Gronk, they would have seen that his special assignment was to fight gladiators in a mazed-shape arena for the sport of nobility, who sat on bleachers high above the maze so they could see what was going on. They would have even had an opportunity to compete and earn some money. It surprised me that they ended up staying on Slowey the entire time, despite me tossing them hooks to go elsewhere. I think the players ended up going to Indira twice, and that was it. It seemed to be what the players wanted, so the campaign ended up playing out in its entirety on Slowy. Making these dramatizations has been fun, but it could also be a chore at times. Although I didn't edit them as heavily as I do the monthly updates, some of the videos ended up being well over half an hour, and took a long time to edit regardless. This last one, for example, has taken me nearly a month to complete and get uploaded. Soon we'll be starting a new campaign with my brother as the Dungeon Master. If I end up doing dramatizations in the future, they will likely be limited to text only. Thanks to all of you who have listened to these dramatizations from the beginning. I hope that you enjoyed them. Remember that events that happened in what you've heard are considered canon in the lore of Alter Aeon. We've got a pretty solid trajectory for Kara, Mordin, and Tess's future exploits that will tie directly into this year's Summer Game event. So for those of you wanting to hear more about our heroes, make sure that you don't miss it. Be the legend you were meant to be. Happy mudding, everybody.